to LOA Today. I'm Walt Jason.
With me today is life coach and LOA teacher Joel Elston.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
And our friend Sam Page can't join us today. Hopefully he'll be able to rejoin us next week. But that doesn't mean we don't have a good topic for today, because we were just chatting before we got going here, Joel, and it has become evident to me before we even get started just how important it is to have a reason for living. I mean, that seems so basic. It seems really so obvious. And yet, if you don't really have it, man, you're kind of in a bad place behind a rock.
Exactly. And the body responds, the brain responds to a purpose. It actually gears up for the purpose. And when your muscles and your brain are actively pursuing a purpose, they gear up, they match what's necessary. And when you don't, the body shuts down, the brain shuts down. When you're not living with a reason and direction, it doesn't make any sense, and people feel directionless. I said right before we started, in Japan, there's really no word for retirement. They really believe strongly, and you just live. You just do what you do, and you go. And if you're 95 and you're whatever it is, you keep doing it. They have several examples in the book that we're going to be discussing that go into that, and how these people live well into their hundreds, very actively into their hundreds. And some of them smoke and drink, and it isn't the traditional model for some of these people. So it's really, and in my personal life, it's as I was reading this book, I remembered an example that I never really put the two together, and the reason I'm sitting here today is likely because of this concept.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we'll have to get to that in a moment. One of the things that occurred to me is that this whole idea of retirement. Well, you said that the Japanese don't have a word for it. We have a word for it. We just don't have a meaning for it. Nobody can seem to agree what retirement is anymore. I mean, there's a cliche, right? There's the gold watch. There's the rocking chair. I'm not sure anyone actually aspires to that anymore. So I'm not sure what retirement means anymore to Americans.
Well, yeah, and that's a great point, because the concept that I don't have to work anymore. I find that I'm fine with the concept of retirement being I don't have to work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I like to continue that you need to continue to work, not have to work, but you need something to do. And I use the word work, but you need something to be passionate about. There's a lot of studies recently that people that work into their 80s and 90s and maintain that same level, their brains, they have many less cases of dementia. Their brain it remains functioning. They have a reason, a purpose to get up every day. And when that stops happening, the aging process just drastically goes forward, and they die quickly. Several people, famous people, have retired from something they're passionate about and were dead. Coach Bear Bryant of Alabama retired from coaching football after many years, 50-something years.
50-some, yeah, it was a while.
Yeah, a long time. And within 2 weeks of retiring, he died. Joe Paterno had a negative exit from football, and he died. And there's people that, when you have a reason, there's people that have lost a child and have died. And because their purpose was their child sometimes. So
that's actually a fairly common phenomenon too, because you find it especially among older married couples. But I can think of a parent-child situation where the child was fully grown. That was the case of Carrie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds.
Yes,
Reynolds
absolutely.
was Carrie Fisher's mother, and within a week of each other they passed.
Absolutely, and the body, as I said, the body and brain anticipates being needed to get up and go. And when there's a perception that there's no point in moving forward, I call it, sort of the purpose of life, or the journey that you're on. When the journey is perceived as being over, there's no point for the body to continue. And I think there's more to that than we realize.
Which once again points to just how powerful the human mind really is. And it also kind of validates a concept that Abraham Hicks got criticized for many times over the years, the idea that we decide when we're going to be here and we can decide when we're going to leave. And lots of people lashed out, well, yeah, my dad didn't decide to leave, he died of cancer, like this all this stuff that came out. But as we look at this, it's like, wow, is there actually something to this? Is there something to the idea that we're making a selection here?
It very well could be. And I admit that there's I know some of their stances, I am all in on Abraham Hicks, as you know,
Yeah.
but I don't necessarily agree with everything.
Hmm.
And, I lost my son in a car wreck,
Right.
and I'm not necessarily convinced that,
Perfect example.
yeah, I don't think he really made a decision. However, I don't know that that wasn't part of his life plan. I'm open to those concepts, but
Mm.
the idea that I certainly feel that you can make a decision to go, and if you have that opportunity, when my mother passed away, she was perfectly healthy. She had
Hmm.
never spent a night in the hospital. She was very active in her yard. She, and my sister was visiting, and she just all of a sudden her eyes rolled back in her head, and they thought she had a stroke, and she went to the hospital. The next day, she woke up and was talking to my sister, and the doctor's like, we have no idea what's going on,
Mm.
and uh, mom all of a sudden at that moment just died,
Wow.
and uh, we to know real understanding of why, and we didn't do an autopsy. She was not an age that it was, she was,
Sure.
it made no sense. But at the same time, I'm looking at, what took place. Did
Mm.
she pass out, and was she given the opportunity to pass over? I mean, she lived a very
Mm.
full life.
Hmm.
She was full of anxiety. She had a lot of stuff going on, and maybe she made the decision, let's wrap this up. I don't know. Um, I feel that, you maybe those choices do apply at times. You make a decision to to transition. I don't know, but I'm fascinated by the whole concept.
I'm reminded of a situation with my ex-wife. Actually, her stepmother passed a number of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, something like that, and did so by choice because she chose to go off medications that were keeping her alive.
Sure.
So we went to visit her just a day or two before she passed, knowing that that was the situation. And Louise had a nice visit with her. And at the end of the visit, I don't even know what inspired me to say it. But as we were leaving the room, saying final goodbye, Louise had actually said her final goodbye. She left the room. I was walking out of the room, and I turned to Ruth, who was her stepmother, and said, "You're about to go on a real adventure, aren't you?" And she gave me this look like, "What on earth are you?"
Yeah, that's what I believe.
But it's true
It
because, among
is.
other things, that's where we find out.
Yes. Yeah, that moment, where why we all have our beliefs, but that moment when what I call transition, or when this stops, uh, a side of me, and I'm going to wait till it happens. I'm wait till that time happens, but I'm really excited to see what's next.
Yeah. Well, I look at it from the viewpoint that we take when we are in this LOA space where we've bought into this idea that we're all what's called source energy. We come from energy. Matter is created from energy. We were part of the overall creation and of all that is, and then we return to pure energy afterward. And well, there are a number of interesting conversations that we've had to address questions tied around that. But one of the questions that come to my mind is the continuation of the personality.
Yes.
Does the personality continue? And there are different views on this within our circles. There are different
Sure.
people with different ideas about this kind of thing. But at the core of that is the question we're addressing right now. Do we choose? Do we actually decide, when we're going to leave? And more importantly, do we decide when we're going to stay? Because really, that's what the topic of the show is today. When we decide to stay, that's where that reason for living has to come in. There has to be some
Yes.
purpose. There has to be some, otherwise, why bother?
Yes. And one of the things that I find fascinating, and I don't judge anyone's belief or criticize however they got there, but what a sort of rough life to believe that it just is this, 80 years or whatever we're going to be here. It's to me, I'm I live fully. Like, if it is going to be that, by the way, I'm going to leave with no regrets. But
Hmm.
at the same time, I really believe in my heart, I know this to be true, just from the years of experience and what I've felt and what I've dreamed and what I've talked to my son TJ about since he's passed away,
Hmm.
that I believe it more. Not only do we believe we get our next life, we get to, almost sort of pick what we're going to do next.
Mm.
All this is included. The end's included as well. And like I said, I sort of like a ride at Disney World to me is you get off, you get right back in line, get right back on, and just that's my view of it. And a lot of people think that's absolutely crazy, and I'm good with that. But,
Well,
but it's
we're
what I
used to
believe.
that one, right? We're
Yeah,
used to
yeah,
people calling us
yeah.
crazy.
I get the crazy label a lot, so I'm fine with that.
That just keeps things interesting, keeps things
It
lively.
does. It does. It does.
So tell us a little bit more about this book, because you mentioned earlier how it was a major influence on you when you were going through your biggest tumult. But tell us more about the details of it.
Okay, the book gets into the concepts of what we're talking about. They give several examples of, uh, the Ikigai, and I think I'm saying that right, is a Japanese concept of literally the reason to wake up. What is your
Hmm.
reason to wake up? What is the
Hmm.
reason to get up and go? One of the ultimate goals in Japanese culture is you try to figure out something you're passionate about, a way to make a living at what you're passionate about that helps you and serves other people, and be able to do it with excellence.
Hmm.
That is what you're trying to do. Something you're great at, make a living at. It serves humanity, and you do it with excellence. And that's something that is just I think great everybody to aspire to. I have a career that I love. I every day I go to work. I'm not saying I don't have some rough days. I'm a human being. There are days I'm like, oh, and then I pull that back around. But I really get to do what I love. I get to set my own schedule. I choose the people that I'm going to work with,
Hmm.
and I get to see people make progress. I get to see, watch people literally change their body language in one session and leave feeling better than they walked in. That's a great concept.
Yeah.
And the idea that I get to do that is it's not missed. I have been offered many, many jobs because before I was doing this, I used to run treatment center, directors of
Right.
treatment centers for addiction. And I've been asked many times to go for very high paying salaries to even part ownership to go get back into that field. And I would never do that because while I enjoyed the working with the clients piece, I never liked the drama or the dealing with staff issues or ownership and all the stuff that went along with that. So I have found what I love, and I will do this. And I jokingly say, one day you're going to read on Facebook, Walt, I died in my office or died at the gym. That's my answer.
Yeah, 50-50 odds on those.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's gonna be one of those two places, or on my way to one of those two places. But and know that and if that happens tomorrow, just know there was zero regrets.
Mm.
He went exactly as planned.
Yeah, yeah, and that's vital.
Yeah,
You used a key phrase there too that I think kind of gets overlooked, because we talked a moment ago about how important it is, particularly the Japanese believe that it's important to find what your passion is so you can have your passion to get up and go live your life. But when we're talking about a passion, what we're really talking about, to use the phrase you used, is what you love.
yes,
And how much time do we actually give to identifying what it is that we love for the purpose of pursuing it?
yes, not much.
Not much. It's kind
And
of frightening, actually. In fact, I'm
well,
rethinking my schedule for the week, to be perfectly honest.
well, and that's sort of the key, sort of societally where we're at is, we have at best, as you're saying, we have at best a certain amount of time that we do that. You're growing up until you're 10, 11, or 12. The brain is operating solely under the influence of your parents. So
Hmm.
you're not really in tune with what's going on. Then is that around that age that it starts to become independent and think differently, and then we start to look at what we love and but you're also told you can't do that, or society says you need to do this. When I got out of school, my dad owned an insurance agency, and
Hmm.
uh, it was never even discussed that I was going to work there or not. It's just, you can take the summer off, and in August you're going to start working here,
It was assumed.
and it was assumed, and I assumed it. Everybody in town assumed it.
Hmm.
He's had a successful business, and where else am I going to, make good money and start off on that level? And so I didn't fight it, but I do remember the very first day that I walked in because I have ADHD at a really high level, and I didn't know the name of it back at the time, but I remember sitting at the desk and looking around my first day going, oh no, this is not going to be good. This is,
Mm.
most first days you're excited. I
Yeah.
was not remotely excited. I just
Mm.
saw trying to make me sit someplace for 8 hours a day with the way my brain works. it wasn't going to end well. And I promise you, it did not end well.
Which is interesting, by the way, because now you sit for large portions of the day talking with people and helping people with their stuff. It wasn't the sitting part. It was what you were doing with it.
Exactly. I'm actively engaged. I sit down. There's an energy exchange. I get into that, and there's a difference between me being there doing something I love and me being there adding up numbers to tell somebody how much their car insurance costs. It literally is robotic, and in fact, computers do it now. Back then, we had to do it by hand,
right,
using a calculator. Now the computers do it, but I can just remember saying, "This is absurd." And my dad had did it for, at that point, he had done it for 30 years, and I was like, "Oh my gosh," And it was his passion. It was what he loved. And I don't know if he loved it because he loved it or he loved it because it gave him financial success, a way to take care of his family. But he just never would have, he just was convinced that was his thing. And I just never, him and I never came across that as I never understood his passion for that business because it just was absurdly boring.
Well, I get that, which shows also just how differentiated our desires and interests and passions are. We tend to kind of forget that, don't we? Because we assume, well, if I love it, somebody else has got to love it, right?
Well, and that's what I very much, biodiversity, where everybody, I never judge anybody else's stuff. One of my friends, and I don't even know she's a colleague, but she's very detail oriented. And when I do something and I need to bring somebody in, she's the very detail oriented. She doesn't like the spotlight. She doesn't like but she will get all the I's dotted, the T's crossed, and all the forms filled out, and compliance. And I'm like, yeah, we're good. And she just knows. But our synergy together is really strong. I'm so grateful that she is so detail oriented. She's a great resource for me. And I'm a great resource for her because I've enabled her to make a really good living.
Right.
But she wouldn't be able to do this part of it. So, and she's passionate about her version too. So I love that. That's why we're all separate. That's why we are all different. And that's what makes it great is you have all these different perspectives that come together, used properly, and not how we use it today, where we look at differences and stress those differences, but it's our differences that make everything possible.
You're reminding me that there are a lot of different ways of understanding things, and what I'm specifically thinking about is I mentioned this all the time here on the show with all the guests that come to the show and the co-hosts and so forth. How everybody who comes onto this show is a giver in some form. They're here to give information, to share what worked for them when they were back against the wall, whatever the storyline might be, and obviously the ones who appear on the show, they're the ones that are getting the attention in that sense, as they also are giving their gifts to the world. But somebody like your colleague, she doesn't give that way. She gives in another way. She enables other people to reach people like you.
Yes.
And so that becomes her form of giving. We kind of skip that, don't we? We figure, well, she's just all oriented about the details, but well, she's also giving, and she's just giving in a different way.
I wouldn't be able to do what I do without someone like her in my life. And I love the fact that people have that. And the difference is I'm an extrovert. I'm out there. I give big talks. I talk loud. I talk fast. None of that, that's who I am. But her personality type doesn't grab a lot of attention.
Right.
And so she's doing it and finding fulfillment. And I'm often pointing out, like, she'll make the comment like, well, I'm like, I'm so grateful. I'm always reminding her how grateful she is in my life and all that she does for me. She's like, well, Joel, you're the star. You're the one that does all this. I said, I'm a train wreck. Let's start with that. I'm a train wreck. So without you being my tracks, I am a train just going down a gravel road. It just doesn't do anything. So and I mean that sincerely, because it's not that, and I'm not being negative toward myself, but I recognize my strengths, and I also know where the things I need help on, and she's the perfect person for that.
Yeah, when we have complementary skills to each other, no matter what our situations are in life, boy, that makes all the difference. I mean,
Absolutely.
I mean, there's the codependent form. That's where, well, this other person completes me. That's one thing. But this is more like the complementary thing, the complementary piece where these are where my skills are. These are where your skills are. These are where my interests are. These are where your interests are, and they fill in for each other. That's the non-codependent version.
I have a visual that I like to do. It's called, what is it? Epoxy, where there's a glue, and there's two substances that you combine together to make this glue. Independently, they're not sticky.
Yeah.
But combined together, they become incredibly binding.
Right.
And they complement each other to become, they're benign apart and super effective together. That's sort of that same thing. It's just,
that's a great idea. That's a great way of saying it.
Yeah. And so I look at it, and that's what I love when I have conversations. I love having conversations with 10-year-olds because their brains are still so wide open, and they have no reason of why things can't work out, and the way everything's easy to them. Like what I was talking to one of my friends, 10-year-old, 11-year-old the other day, and he's I don't know why everybody's concerned about our water supply. We have unlimited water in the oceans. And I go, well, it's getting the salt out. And he goes, okay, it's getting the salt out of the water.
I love it.
Step one, you get the water. Step two, you take the salt out. Step three, you. So in a 10-year-old's brain,
I love it.
And he's not necessarily wrong, because we say, well, it costs too much and we does all this, but we can do it. It's just it does cost a lot of money. So there's other factors, but from a 10-year-old's perspective, it's just a 3-step process.
And by the way, interesting point there. Yeah, it costs more than we want to spend.
Yes.
But that doesn't preclude two possibilities. One, that it becomes worthwhile to spend it. And the other possibility that it doesn't preclude is the price might come down, because people are making, breakthroughs all the time. That's how our society keeps leaping forward. So I wouldn't want to predict that 10 years from now, there's not a nice, inexpensive way to remove the salt from the ocean water. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, and not that this is our topic, but the same 10-year-old, he said, he talks about all this genius stuff. So we were talking about nuclear power plants, and the steam coming out of the nuclear power plants is just water from the cooling. It's vapor from the cooling. And he goes, well, why don't you just use salt water, cool that thing down, catch that vapor, and that's purified water, right? And I go,
I love it.
Yeah, it is. I don't know why that won't work, but I mean, it might. I don't know, but surely the 10-year-old didn't come up with that. But it's like, it's thinking like that, and you're saying there's going to be processes. There's cold fusion is going to eventually be a thing, and when we have cold fusion, you're going to be able to create energy that you could do anything with very cheaply. So all things are on the table.
Yeah, you really can't eliminate any. I mean, cold fusion is something that we're nowhere near and haven't been for some time, although there have been topics and conversations about it. But who knows what's going to happen down the line? I mean, lately there's been a lot of interest in the various discoveries of, his name was right on my mind, Nikola Tesla. Tesla has had all these interesting things that he came up with that are still being implemented or tried. Or one of the most interesting ones that I heard lately, my sister was telling me about this one. Apparently there is and I can't remember exactly how all this works, so don't pin me down on it. But there is a way to generate a non-wave waveform. And that non-wave waveform, apparently, according to some people, has healing properties. And I mean, I have no idea if that's actually going to prove out to be true. She claims that she's already experienced it with herself and her roommate and so forth. I did a little reading, and I saw a lot of skepticism about it. It probably comes down a lot to what you and I talk about, how much you believe in it. But regardless, there's a possibility that something starts to come out of that we didn't even know about last year, let alone last month. Yeah, and that's just part of being part of this wonderful, crazy, insane human race. We create, man. We create like crazy.
We do. We manifest, and Tesla was very much he believed in. He was talking energy frequencies long before anybody was talking energy frequencies, and in fact, when he was talking about, people thought he was crazy because there was no way to measure the frequencies he was talking about. So how he even came up with that, I don't know, because it's just so baffling that he was so accurate and before they could even be measured.
An interesting point, though. A lot of the things that Tesla and Edison and others were talking about at that time were actually being explored mentally by a lot of people. A lot
Sure.
of people were kind of delving into these realms. I mean, for instance, we think of Einstein as being the guy behind the theory of relativity, which he was, but there were a whole bunch of people who were talking about what we now call quantum physics
Sure.
at
Oh
that
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
it wasn't just one or two people. There was like a sizable community spread out across the globe looking into this stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the most fascinating things, from my perspective, is that to me that's an epigenetic piece of evidence that so many
yes.
people are on the same thing at the same time, right? So when I tie that into the original topic of the show, a reason for living, all those people had a reason to get up in the morning like, wow, I've got this really cool thing that I'm a part of, and I'm like on the leading edge of it, and I'm going to create this new stuff, and I have no idea how I'm going to earn my living today because this doesn't pay any money, but wow, this is really, really cool. That's a perfect example of somebody who had a lot to live for every single time.
There's in the book, they're talking about this Japanese illustrator who, in these words won't mean much to us old people, but the comic book concept of manga,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes way back. And the guy that sort of invented that would draw very. If you ever seen some of these drawings that he put in his comic books or graphic novels, were just they're intense. They're
Mm,
done by hand and they're very deep and they're very intense.
right.
And every morning he would get up and start drawing. And he also did some feature films and did a lot of things. And he was drawing on the day he died. He was just
Wow.
at 107 or whatever the number was. It was just and it just that's all he knew. He was dying too, and he still wanted to get up. My
Right.
personal experience with my friend Dr. Master, who I often have discussed in the past, who is my mentor and uh, really I wouldn't have in my life what I have without him. What he brought to the table for me. Him and I worked very closely together the last several years of his life,
Mm,
and he developed lung cancer, having never smoked in his life. He developed lung cancer, uh, and I was talking to him what was going to be the morning that he died, and he was in his hospital bed talking, going over his patients with me and what I needed to do and who I needed to contact
wow.
and calling in prescriptions for people for refills. And later that day, he passed away.
Hmm.
Um, and I believe when he was diagnosed, him and I were talking about it, and he said he was thinking about cutting back and at work, and I said absolutely not. He worked at a addiction facility that now has his name, the Master Center for Addiction
Hmm.
Medicine. He he kept working and kept working and kept working and kept working, and we right up to when he died. And I believe he had the quality of life he had, and the additional time after his diagnosis he had was based on his refusal to stop.
That's really an inspiring story. You work a lot with people who struggle with a variety of things in their lives. You've worked a lot with young men, particularly in the foster care system. You worked with people who had a similar situation to you with uncontrolled addictions and so forth. You work with a lot of people who struggle on a lot of different levels. We were talking before we got started here about how that struggle can be viewed in a lot of different ways, including the idea that the struggle is really all about not having a reason for living, a purpose, a passion
Yes,
for getting up
yes.
in the world. Um, let's go back to your story when you first encountered the book. Maybe tie into your own experience how that played out for you.
You mean my origin story of
Right,
1995? Yeah, okay.
right,
So, sort of to set the stage, it was in August of 1995. Everything's when it fell apart for me.
right.
Uh, my the job I had, I was director of a group home for emotionally handicapped children. Uh, was employee of the year in January and was fired for stealing in August.
Mm,
My gambling addiction was out of control. I tried to stop, and I couldn't. I'm not making excuses. I was stealing, so by no means
hmm.
am I trying to minimize that.
Sure.
And by every means, they should have fired me. And they also let me know they're going to be prosecuting me. And so I'm going from sort of a respected person that I was well known in the community for my work with this population. Uh, everybody was always, calling me and, asking me to consult. And all of a sudden I walk into my supervisor's office and brought all my books. And I said, I've been stealing from the company. I have an out of control gambling addiction and I don't know what I'm going to do. And she, because, I have a sense of humor. And she's like,
Yeah,
she
you
said,
do have a bizarre enough sense of humor. You could actually
yeah.
have carried that one off, I believe.
Yeah. And she goes, Joel, I don't have time for this today. I'm really busy. And I go, no, I wish. And she saw the look on my face. And so as I was leaving the office, she said, what are you going to do? And I go, I don't know. And I didn't. I had nowhere to go. I had couldn't go back to where I was living because I'd stolen the rent money from that lady. So I was just in a mess. And so I was sleeping in my car.
Is it fair to say at that point that you lacked a reason?
I lacked a reason, a desire, or any hope of a future to continue. I didn't have anything. And also, if anybody's triggered by this, I apologize. I know when people talk suicidal thoughts and stuff, this is my story. I'm telling my story authentically, and it might be good not to listen because I am going to talk about some of that if that triggers you. But it ends nicely because I'm sitting right here. So
it's very true.
Yeah. So we can get to that. So when I left her office, I had a nebulous plan of I don't want to live. But I did have a gun and I didn't know what I was going to do with that. But I didn't want to die. I just didn't want to live this way anymore. So, through a weird chain of events, I end up finding a halfway house, a sober living home, or whatever you want to call it, for people who had a gambling addiction specifically. Ironically, it was on Anna Maria Island, the place where I spent my childhood, every summer, which I loved. So that was sort of a sign to me that maybe things are looking up. So I ended up at this facility, and by now I'm co-owner of that facility. It's now operating out of Arizona, they're still in business. So the person that took me in is one of my best friends and business partners. So as I was going through the motions of recovery, it was overwhelming. I had $250,000 in credit card debt. I was facing felony criminal charges. My family isn't speaking to me. I lost all my friends. The person who I was probably going to marry just totally, blown away by all this information, wasn't speaking to me. So there was nobody left, and it was just me. So I got to the treatment center, and that was August 17th of 1995, and I immediately got a job waiting tables. I didn't know what was going to happen. My employer said they're going to prosecute, but I was waiting for that. I asked them to let me know so I could turn myself in. Didn't want to be arrested. But in the meantime, I got a job at this after school center. And while I was waiting tables, I would work in this after school center with these kids, sort of disadvantaged children, lower economic things. It was sort of supported by the government, and really enjoyed that. It wasn't the role I was playing before, but I was just able to go out and play. I was able to have fun. We played football. We just nonstop, threw water balloons at them, always getting in trouble with the staff because I was crazy with the kid, running around. So it got my mind off everything. It was really good. So that went on for a couple months. And on October 11th, 1995, the police showed up at my employment and basically arrested me with no warning. And so what little bit of life I'd built back up thinking, wow, there's a shot I'm going to be able to do this. When my supervisor, her name's Karen Stewart, and she might even watch this video now. We're friends. She's very successful in many areas, and still in Bradenton, Florida. She's got a new position. She's very caring. I was really embarrassed. So I went to jail for 30 days. And so all of a sudden I'm convicted. I wasn't convicted at that point, but I was charged with grand theft. And they let me out after 30 days, after probably 28 days. And I knew I was going to have to plead guilty to a felony. So I went back to waiting tables, and miraculously, Karen, who had reached out to my friend Rick and said, whatever happened to Joel, he was really good with the kids. When he gets that fixed, have him come back. And I was shocked that she would offer me to come back and work with kids after being arrested. That's just like, wow.
Right.
So I went to work back, and I met a couple kids. There two in particular. There's one young man named Joe. Uh, at the time, he was 10 years old, and his brother Seth was 5 years old. And I've written about them on Facebook. They're grown men, obviously now doing very
Sure.
well. We're very close. But their mom had like 9 children. Uh, she struggled. She worked very hard, but 9 children, that's a lot
Yeah.
of children.
Oh, yeah.
Single mom, a few different dads, and it was really rough. And so they were really lacking a lot. And as much, and mom was working, so they're left alone a lot. Uh, Joe was taking care of the little kids. There was like even younger children than Seth, and so there was a lot going on with them. So we developed a really close bond. So Joe invited me to his 10th birthday party, which I thought was sort of weird. At the time I'm going to a 10-year-old's birthday party, but we had a blast. We played football, and it was like we made a really big connection.
Hmm.
And as time went on, my life, it seemed like nothing was getting better. I was waiting tables, doing odd jobs, but my restitution was killing me. And I knew I had court in in November, the day before Thanksgiving in 1995, where I pled guilty to a felony theft charge, which eliminated a lot of possibilities of jobs for me. So I was in this period of time where I was barely making it. I was struggling. And there were many days, that I thought, I need to just end this. It's not worth it. I just can't keep going. And I thought of different ways to kill myself. I thought of, painless ways. I didn't want to do it in front of anybody. I was going to drown myself in the ocean one time, but I'm not going to do that. And so I just kept thinking. Now, again, I don't believe I really wanted to die, but I just didn't want to keep living like I was living.
Right.
But it got to a point I started realizing. There was one weekend in particular. I said, I just can't do this anymore. And this is such an old, I didn't have a cell phone at the time. This is back when we had pagers. So
Right.
Joe, 10-year-old Joe said, he texted me or sent a message. What do you do? They paid you. Yeah. So you
paged
call
you.
them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot. Yeah. And so I called him back, and he goes, my mom's at work and we don't have any food and we're hungry.
Oh.
And I said, okay. I maybe had $12 to my name, but
Hmm.
they needed the $12 more than I needed the $12. So I went and got some milk and some cereal and some stuff, and $12 still can buy enough food for a little bit. And so I took it to him, and then I hung out with him until she got home, and then I started realizing, we really made a connection. And as bad as I had it, what I had done was my fault. What they had done is that had nothing to do with them. They're just in this situation.
Mm.
And so I realized, if I kill myself, who do they have left? Who brings them food on that day? Who's there? And so I said, well, they became a reason for me to live.
Yeah.
They started spending the weekends with me. We went to arcades, and because it gave them, but not that I was normal, but they could spend a weekend at the beach. We had that house there with plenty of rooms, and they had their own area, and so they'd go down the beach and stuff. So they started looking for it was a little refuge for them.
Sure.
And I didn't have enough money to do stuff I did today, but we would do little stuff. We'd go out to eat at like Taco Bell and stuff they wouldn't get to do. We'd see movies. And so we became very, very close. And I really believe that connection with them in some of the darkest days of my life gave me a purpose to keep getting up, gave me a reason to keep going. That's all I had, is they need me. I didn't have any grand plans. There's no way to ever envision that I would have the life I have today. That would be an impossible dream.
Right.
But at that, you couldn't imagine that. There wasn't a plausible path to get here.
Mm-hmm.
I was paying off, credit card debt and restitution, and I'm waiting tables. It's not the most lucrative career in the world. So, it just really kept going. And Rick, the owner of the property that I was staying at, eventually asked me to be house manager. I eventually took the training to become a gambling counselor. Then I eventually developed this. Then I became co-owner of a South Carolina facility, ended up moving to Virginia. All these things kept happening. And my passions and my direction, it became self-fulfilled. And I now I look at it with amazement. But that early part, that part where Joe and Seth had nobody, I had no reason to live except for what horrible thing I can do to kill myself. The one person that's shown any interest in these people at all kills himself. How do you tell those kids that? And that kept me alive. That kept me from even thinking about that anymore. Those were the last times I've ever seriously considered killing myself. It's just, I believe that reason and purpose saved my life. I didn't ever realize that till I read this book and I put this concept and went retroactively and see how it went together.
That's an interesting last point you just made there. What was the time difference between when you were experiencing this and when you read the book?
This took place in 1995, and I read the book the first time last year.
So that's a really big span. That's a span of what, 20, almost 27, 28 years, something like that.
Yeah.
At some point in there, it just seems like, well, you must have at some point realized that there was something going on, that you had a reason for living. And yet that book you just told us is where it finally became clear to you.
Well,
a lot of people are going to ask, how is that possible?
Well, let me explain. I have recognized that they played a very important role in my life. I understood that me getting up and helping them. So I've even told them that. I was grateful that they were in my life. They're grateful that I was in their life. And I'm still in their life. Seth is a commercial fisherman. He takes Justin out on the boat when we're down.
Wow.
So I mean, they're family to me. These kids are my family. These men are my family. But I knew, so I'm not claiming that I didn't see the connection. I never put a word to it. I never saw the intense value that I see it now, that they literally may have saved my life by just being there, by me. But but I've always seen the value. So it didn't like I just discovered the value.
Right.
But now that I can put a name to the concept, like I've always understood the law of attraction before I ever gave the name to the law of attraction. Before I ever heard the concept.
This is actually, I think, a really important thing, because I think many of us, we go through life recognizing some nebulous thing to be true. We don't have a label for it. We don't have a way of describing it. Somebody comes along and tells us about law of attraction. Oh, now I have a way to describe this thing that I've always kind of knew was there, but didn't really believe clearly enough to actually try to explain it to somebody else because they would think I was crazy. All that kind of stuff can go on. And it occurs to me, there are probably, huge numbers of people who deal with really severe situations. Many of them perhaps have experienced, like you did, a consideration of ending it all, or other kinds of dire situations as well. I wonder how many of them have a sense somewhere that there's a key thing going on somewhere in their lives, and they don't have a way of labeling it. They don't have a way of understanding it. They may even be ashamed of it because society has taught them to be ashamed of it in some way. I wonder how many people are in that camp, and they're just looking for a way to express that thing that they're feeling, whatever that thing is.
I think it's a lot of people. As you know, I'm always looking for the synchronicity in life. I'm always looking for the concepts of, why did I meet this person? How come these people are here? Now, not half the time, maybe 3/4 of the time, I never figure out why they were there. But there's people that come along, and there's events that happen, and me being put in somebody's life at a certain time, and then later it making a lot of sense, has never ceased to amaze me. So synchronicity is one of those things that I discovered a long time ago. I don't dismiss any person that comes into my life. There could be a reason. There's likely a reason. If it's not for me, it's for them. I could be a supportive role in their life as well. So, but I think there's a lot of people that go through life, they're missing, they feel it, but also when you talk about this stuff in general, like, for example, law of attraction. You and I've talked about my Southern Baptist upbringing and
right.
The exciting adventure that was. And so anytime that I would try to get out of that confines, anybody that I was trusted, my mom, my dad, or the preacher, you couldn't have a discussion with them because that's all they knew. So anything that led me to believe, or my deep understanding, there's something more than this, it was shot down. I was told, you can't, at 12 years old, no, that's Satan trying to convince you otherwise. And I'm going, I
Yeah.
don't think so, but it's that's all they would say. So eventually, my 12-year-old brain just, okay, well, I guess that's it, but never stopping believing. And then one day waking up going, damn it, I knew that was right. Now I see it. But
Hmm.
I was driven to that concept at 12 years of age, instinctively, would have dreams about it and never had the words. I didn't know that Jane Roberts had written the Seth books at the time.
Right.
If somebody would have handed me one of those, I'd be like, okay, there you go.
Yeah, I hear you on that. What this is kind of coalescing in my mind to kind of reach a conclusion is that most often when people, and you tell me if you think this is accurate or inaccurate, most often when people are struggling with all kinds of stuff, whatever it is they're struggling with, it could be life-threatening, it could be much more mundane, it could be somewhere in between. But when they're struggling with that stuff, there is, I think in probably all cases, that sense of this other thing, this belief, this thing that challenges our preconceptions, that the people around us won't support, whatever. There's that element there. And what we're really trying to discover when we are discovering our reason for living is, among other things, our reason for believing and trusting that which we already sense,
Yes,
that which we already know.
yes. I feel that I wish we had more of that discovery, trusting your gut, trusting the inner
Mhm.
dialogue, trusting the stuff that a lot of people won't say what they think because of fears or being
Yeah.
chastised or being canceled in today's culture. Or,
Mhm.
when you say things, there's I get my fair share of criticism,
Mhm.
and and you know how desperately bad that upsets me.
Yeah,
Uh,
it ruins your day, I know.
yeah, yeah. but there's people that and all I'm saying, my belief system, and I've said this multiple times on the show, my belief system requires no one else to agree with it.
Mm.
I'm good if you do, good if you don't. You do you. Uh, but my belief system is built on a lot of stuff that has personally happened and been revealed to me that I've experienced, and it's unequivocally fact to me.
Mm.
It's not, I don't have all the details right, like we are talking about, the end, and I don't have all that exact. And I'll report back when I get that information. But
I have no doubt that you actually will. So, I mean, I'm
yeah,
taking
yeah,
that one with a half a laugh.
yeah. But this idea that we were we're here, and you're combined with all this stuff we're talking about. We all are programmed with a unique set of abilities. They're separate.
Mm.
Your skill set is different than my skill set. A lot of our stuff is overlapping, but it's different in other areas.
Right.
And that's sort of the point. Is no one is expected to be this cookie cutter, everybody do the same thing theory.
Mm.
And that's why I get so upset with the education system, because your Jordan Peterson right now, while certainly controversial in a lot of things he says, uh,
I'm laughing because his name has been mentioned by at least a half dozen different people on the show in the last 2 weeks. It's
really,
amazing how
yeah,
much this guy's
yeah,
going. Yeah.
yeah. Well, he's really good at social media. So I'm not espousing to believe in all the stuff he says, but a lot of the points he makes, particularly about boys in particular,
Mm.
girls, and it can be girls too. The way their brain is programmed to learn is through play, is through physical activity. So to sit a 7-year-old in a chair, tell him not to squirm, and learn his multiplication tables, and then if he doesn't do it, say he has a disease and you need some stimulant or
Mm.
methamphetamine to calm your brain down, is absolutely absurd.
It's not
It's
only
just
absurd, it's
absurd.
also damaging.
It is. So, and I am the king of ADHD. So I'm not, I own my ADHD, as you know. But the idea that I can remember, just my brain was running so hard, and if I were outside learning, I have my dear neighbor that I talk about often, the 11-year-old kid. Him and I spent some time together this past Sunday, and him and I carried on an hour conversation about everything from Amelia Earhart to theories of different things.
Mm.
And it was, he probably learned more in that hour than he did the whole week at school
Sure.
about stuff. And
Yeah.
So he would ask me a question, and I was driving. We were going to go to Dave and Buster's, and we were driving, and he would ask me a question. I go, he had his phone with him. I go, well, look it up, Google, tell me the answer. And so he would ask me the question. I'd have him Google the answer, and then we would discuss the answer. And that stuff he'll always remember the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And so this idea that we, as people, we have these things. So your inner gut, the stuff that drives you early, and we eventually squash out in today's society and say, no, that's not the way you do it. Here's what you got to do. You got to go here. You got to go to this 4-year college and learn this, pre-packaged bunch of stuff, and you're going to go make a bunch of money. That's when people feel unfulfilled. Dominion Energy is the big power company and here, and I think we go into North Carolina as well too. And their headquarters here in Richmond. And I work with some executives from Dominion Energy that make fabulous amounts of money. They are tethered to the company because they have to be there to a certain age to get fully vested in their retirement.
Right.
They make a lot of money a year. Some of them make close to $1 million a year, and they're miserable. They hate it. But they can't leave. You can't leave because it will cost me $500,000 or cost me $1 million to leave. I have to stay.
Yeah.
And it's this, so there's that pre-programming of like, I wish I'd have never done this. I wish I'd never, I've been trapped. The golden handcuffs, they have a lot of terms for it. But it's this premise that by listening to, by being able to find that purpose, that direction, and be able to, it's a invigorating way to live. And when I see people do it, there's people, one of my neighbors recently got her doctorate. She's she really is an expert in helping people connect people with services, people with special needs, low-income families, and she does that for one of the school systems here. And she's incredibly detail-oriented. She knows everything about the whole. She's living a purpose. She's saving people's lives. She's connecting people with vital stuff they aren't capable of getting themselves. And she's developed it. She's living a passion. And it's just amazing to watch her do it. And I can no means remotely do what she does. She's a very, very talented person. I think she's drastically overpaid working for the school system, underpaid. Sorry. But I won't get into that commentary. But I at one point tried to consider hiring her for one of my ventures. And I'm like, I don't want to take her away from what she's doing because she's doing so much good. But it's this idea of being able to, whatever your thing is. I know a gentleman who's very detailed oriented here in my neighborhood, struggled in school, pretty ADHD kid. He's a grown man now again. He has a tile company. He puts tile, and he's an expert craftsman. Makes a fortune, does really well, has raised his family in a very good lifestyle, raised his son, paying for college right now. And he did that with an incredible skill, passion for being able to cut tile. If you want to see a funny experiment, I should do a YouTube of Joel cutting tile.
Okay.
Yeah, it will not be pretty. It is not going to come. He can make those little curves and all that. And I'm just going to break it. I promise. So, again, this is a skill I don't have. It's a skill I admire. So everybody out there, I really believe there's a point and a reason and a skill set in you that matches your passion and what your purpose is. And when you can tap into that and live that authentically, that's the wheelhouse. That's the point of all this. And when you do, your lifespan is increased. Your quality of life is drastically increased. You want to live more. The body responds. The brain and body responds to the demands, particularly when those demands are passion based. You're driven harder.
So this is kind of a funny time to ask it because, as usual, I'm asking it toward the end of the program. But I think all that we talked about here is kind of a setup for this in a way that if I had asked this at the beginning of the program, it would kind of fall on flat. But we've given it a whole lot of life and dimensionality by having this big lead up. So the lead up to the question, here's the question. If I want to find my passion in life, how do I find it?
Let me take a sip of water for that one.
I know it's going to take more than a minute or two, but we did do a good setup for it, so it shouldn't be all that difficult.
Well, when you're trying to, part of what we talk about, when you're trying to manifest your passion, when you're trying to get that, I forget who said it. It's one of the teachers that I follow, maybe Napoleon Hill. When you find out what you want to do, where you're passionate about, put all your energy toward that. If you don't know what that is, find somebody who does have a passion, help them achieve theirs while you're looking for yours.
Yeah.
And I like that concept. But I also, for me, I had to awaken to my passion. Life had to happen. A lot of things were going on. And I had an awakening like, wow, this is, the part of the story where I became a gambling counselor in Florida, and I didn't even really want to do that. It seemed I wanted to go make a lot of money, and that path didn't seem to ever have a way to make me make a lot of money.
Right.
But I did it, and I was actually good at it. And the more I did it, I started getting notoriety. Now, again, unfortunately, gamblers have no money by the time they need treatment, so not a high-paying career early. But it led to the concept of what I do now. And I learned a lot during that process. And while I was able to provide for my family when I was doing those things, I later got to a point where all that came together and put it together in I'm doing 100% of what I like. When I was running the treatment centers, the various ones, I was doing 50% of what I wanted. Working with the people, developing new programs. The reason you and I connected in the very beginning, I don't know how you found this, but you discovered I was using the law of attraction in an addiction treatment center setting.
Which blew me away. Yeah.
Yes. And that was how you found me. You wanted to interview me on that concept. And to my knowledge, I don't want to claim to be the sole proprietor of that concept, but I had never heard of anybody using that concept with addiction treatment to that point.
I can second that one because I had been looking and you were the only one I found.
Yes. And so when we started having great success using those concepts, and the owner of that program, Bob Cabanis, that gave me the opportunity to come to Virginia, I've always appreciated his willingness to let me go out on those limbs and investigate that. And we had great success. I combined that with exercise on a daily basis. I combined that with nutrition on a daily basis, meditation, yoga, all those things we added. And it's something that's the passion of when I was developing programs, using the things that have worked for me to help treat addiction, because I think addiction, as we're saying, just like we're saying with depression, is really a lack of purpose a lot of times. I think addiction is a lack of connection, a lack of direction, and having a very unfulfilled life is often the underlying cause of addiction, as well as trauma. And being able to deal with that makes a big difference. So when you find your passion, a lot of times you discover it by accident. But I always encourage people to, make a list of what you like. There's a diagram you could draw. What do I love to do? What am I good at? Where can I make money? And somewhere in that axis, you'll start to get an idea of where that is.
And there's also another key thing too that was part of your story. It's certainly been part of my story too, especially in terms of doing this podcast. And that is when you pursue something just because you love it without having a regard for whether or not it's going to produce income for you. That's counterintuitive at first. Yes. I mean, in your case, it was basically keeping you alive because you decided it was more important to you to live and work with these kids who needed your help, and they weren't going to get help from anybody else. So that gave you a purpose in that sense. And then over time, you found your purpose growing there, even though there was still almost no income associated with it. And the same thing happened to me with this show. I mean, you and I have had conversations over these. I was trying to figure out, how can I monetize this? How can I turn this into something? Everything I ever looked at for monetizing turned my stomach, so I couldn't really do it. But nevertheless, I mean, I kept trying to do that. And I finally came to terms with the fact that, I don't have to monetize everything.
No.
And along the way, what happens is, even if I haven't found something that's producing money, just by following something that creates passion for me leads to other things that create passion. Well, when it becomes a stepping stone.
What you're describing is the book that I'm actually writing right now, called The Law of Action, that we talk about every week, and we laugh because I'm not making much progress right now. But that book is that concept. So the law of action leads you to, you take one step, that's any step. It doesn't have to even make sense. Just movement gets you to that next step. And that's where so I agree. The podcast is a conduit to other things. It might not. And one day the podcast, I keep expecting somebody one day from one of these big podcast things to look at all these episodes you've done and come in and say, wow, we need you here. I'm hoping that happens one day. But even if it doesn't, like you're saying, the ideas and the connection, the energy, and I've watched, not to get into your personal life, but I think this podcast was instrumental in you getting through some really tough times over the years I've known you.
100%. 100%.
We've been through a few cycles together over the years, and and you were struggling, but I think every day needing to do this podcast was sort of your version of those kids I'm talking about. You needed to get up and do the podcast. Maybe not so drastic, but you needed to get up and do the podcast.
Well, I think for me it was a source of energy.
Yes, because we always said in the early days, the early law of attraction days, it might have been me and you only. So
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
Numbers showed it, by the way.
Yeah. But I always felt better after our talks. I always felt great. I always felt energized. So that's how you start finding it. That's actually the whole concept of law of attraction, LOA today, is sort of what we're talking about. Exactly. You let it lead and lead and lead, and then never, I always let go of the outcomes. And with me, the idea of money and that I have multiple streams of revenue. I have different things coming in. Money's not even on my list of manifesting anymore. It's on autopilot. But for so long, that was a struggle. That was, you need to do that. And ironically, when I sort of quit chasing that and allowed this other purpose-driven stuff to come up, it's just been fascinating with that. And it's, it always comes about. I see this transformation with a lot of people I work with. I had a young man in my office today. He's very, we'll use the word depressed, but he's just lethargic. He doesn't have a lot going on. And I was literally talking to him about a lot of the stuff we're talking about.
Okay.
And I said, what, he doesn't know what he wants to do. He's in between he's completed his second year of college. He's in the summer of that. He's just, he doesn't know what his major should be. It's a generic business major. None of that's hitting his, but we talked about just different things and how that could lead, and how he doesn't have to have the end goal in sight. He just has to focus on the journey right now and get up every day and do these things. And, he texted me when he said, I left your office and went straight to the gym, and said he felt better. So implement that every day. That's an action to take. That pull yourself out of that. Most times if he went and saw a psychiatrist today, he would be at Walgreens filling his Prozac prescription,
right,
and not feeling any better.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Well, as usual, Joel, you came up with the perfect topic. Congratulations. Well done. I count on you for that. I love that. I can't wait to see and you're drawing these all from the books that you listen to. I mean, because you're listening to books constantly. So you're giving us an endless supply of topics for conversation. So thank you for that as well. But
it's good. I enjoy it. Yeah.
Well, we nailed it today. Once again, we really nailed it.
Yeah, really good show today, Paul.
Good stuff today. So thank you very much. And we saw some people in the live stream listening in, so thank you for joining us. Thank you to podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.